everyone, George DeSantis here with the look at the market for the week ending June 3rd, 2016. As we'll see on the charts, nothing much has changed over the long run. We're still stuck within a trading range, and we'll point that out as we go along. Let's start looking at the monthly chart of the S&P 500 as we usually do. So on this monthly chart, what we see is that the parabolic is still below the most recent bar. We've just entered the month of June, of course. We only had a couple of trading days so far in June. However, what we should note is that the Kalman filter is now above the instantaneous trend line. It crossed here, and it's above the instantaneous trend line, and that signals an uptrend. In addition, the parabolic is telling us there is no need to reverse the trend. This is one of those indicators that identifies a reversal, and right now, because the parabolic yellow dot here is below the most recent bar, there is no indication to reverse that uptrend. In fact, we reversed to an uptrend here, no indication to reverse to a downtrend. Now, MACD is trending up, MACD histogram trending up from below the zero line. And those who are familiar with Alex Elder's work, trading for a living, you will note that he mentions that one of the best times to be buying an instrument, whether it be a stock or an index or whatever, is when MACD is trending up from below the zero line. That may be another indication to us that maybe we are in a reversal here to an uptrend, and we can look forward to more gains in the market. Although we are stuck within this trading range as we've seen for some time now, this is an encouraging sign to me anyway. Elder Force index is still above the zero line, and that sort of supports the notion that the market is beginning to look more bullish. Let's take a look at the weekly chart of the S&P. Okay, this is the weekly chart of the S&P 500, which we usually look at. The first thing that I usually look at is what is the relationship between the Kalman filter and the instantaneous trend line. Of course, I've said that many times before. Well, in this case, on this weekly chart, Kalman filter remains above the instantaneous trend line. And that means that we are in an uptrend on the weekly chart. It trended up here, came back and found some support at 2046 and trended up for the last 2 weeks. Where do we go from here? Well, we're bumping up against that 2100 level that we've seen so many times before. And right now we have, last week we had this doji, which is a candlestick that suggests that there is uncertainty or indecision in the market. And it is quite possible we're going to see a correction. I mean, there's all possibilities here, but the correction is not out of the question here. Because if you look back here, for example, you'll see these small body candlesticks. Sometimes this kind of a candlestick is called a dragonfly. And these candlesticks oftentimes lead to a correction. And this one was a pretty good correction. So that's a possibility. On the other hand, we have the parabolic still below the most recent price bar, last week's price bar. It's hidden below the instantaneous trend line here. And so there's no indication to reverse this uptrend. RSI 12 is now sitting at about 60%, and that's fairly bullish, quite bullish. MACD is above the zero line. In fact, it is attempting to trend up here. So that's pretty bullish. And percent R is showing us there's a great deal of momentum to this uptrend that we're seeing. And it's way above the 80% line. So all in all, the weekly chart still looks bullish, with one caveat. We have this dragonfly type of candlestick here. And we are likely to see, at least temporarily, some short pullback, if not a bigger one. So let's take a look at the daily chart. Here's a daily chart that we usually look at. We've seen this many times before. It's a 930 system, 9 EMA, 30 weighted moving average. We can see that the 9 is above the 30. Therefore, we're getting that signal of an uptrend here, as we saw on the weekly chart too. Parabolic is below the most recent bar, so there's no indication to reverse this uptrend. If we look at the candlesticks, though, we find that we have somewhat of a hammer here. Rather, not a hammer, a hanging man, which is somewhat bearish, which I was mentioning on the weekly chart. We're likely to see a little, somewhat of a correction. This hanging man is supporting that notion, though we might see a bit of a correction here. Although, as I mentioned many times before, we don't make decisions on candlestick formations only. Personally, I don't. And I think Steve Nissen, who's brought candlesticks to the Western world from Japan, he states that very clearly in his books. Do not make all your trading decisions based on candlesticks alone. Right now, we do have the hanging man. We should be careful that we're going to get some kind of a pullback here. Now, if we look at RSI 12, it is slightly above 60%. So that's in the bullish territory. Williams pro buying indicator is pretty high here, is way above the zero line. And also percent R is showing us some bullishness as well. In other words, the momentum is pretty high. Let's take a look at another chart. And here's the other daily chart of the S&P that we look at. And of course, it's the same daily chart, so except for a few different indicators. In this case, we have the instantaneous trend line, and we have the Kalman filter, and the relationship between these two is clearly pointing to an uptrend. Of course, we will see the same sort of hammer here, rather hanging man, and therefore it is suggesting that we might get a pullback, possibly to the instantaneous trend line. Hopefully we'll find some support there, and the uptrend may continue. That's, of course, to be determined. Jerry Appel's sum of the rate of change indicator is now hanging around the 4% line. It's slightly below it. So there's that reflection of indecision here, I suppose. MACD is continuing to trend up somewhat. And of course, we saw that percent R is above the 80% line. So let's look at another chart. Here's a weekly chart of the S&P again, but in this case, I wanted to show you the CCI indicator here at the bottom of the chart. So we can see that since it crossed above the zero line here, signaling the uptrend that we've had, it's remained above zero, and it's currently trending up a bit. So it sort of supports the idea that we are in an uptrend on this weekly chart. Let's take a look at something else. And here's the weekly chart of the S&P 500 from stockcharts.com. And on this chart, we find the impulse indicator was painted green, blue, or red. Those who are not familiar with the impulse indicator can certainly Google it from Alex Elder's work and learn more about that. In any case, on the weekly chart, last 2 weeks, the bars have been painted green, allowing us to hold or to buy the S&P itself. At the bottom of the chart, we find percent R is above the 20% line. I use a 30-period RS Williams percent R. And what I would like to show you is that when percent R is above that 20% line, the 30 period anyway, usually the trend is up. In this case here, the percent R dropped below the 20% line, and of course we saw the beginning of these pullbacks, these two pullbacks. MACD is still above the zero line, and it's looking to trend up a little bit here, it seems. So on the weekly chart, the impulse is still green. Let's take a look at the daily chart. On the daily chart, though, we have a blue bar. A blue bar indicates that we can go either way, short or long. But if the weekly chart is green, I'm not going to short it. So right now, we find that both the weekly chart is green and the daily chart is blue. So the preponderance of evidence seems to me to be hold or buy, not go short. Okay, there is no red bar here. So let's take a look at something else. And this chart is a chart of the spread between the number of stocks making new highs versus those making new lows. And we see that it continues to trend up here. There are more highs and lows, and this trend is up. So let me just quickly summarize. The monthly chart turned bullish. Okay, Kalman filter crossed above the instantaneous trend line. Parabolic is below the most recent bar and been so for the last, well, for the current month and for the last month, April. The weekly chart remains bullish. Kalman filter is above the instantaneous trend line, and there are quite a few other indications that we saw there that the market is bullish. The daily chart shows us an indication now that we might get a brief pullback because we have that hanging man candlestick there, so that's a possibility. On the other hand, we're still in an uptrend. So I haven't sold anything. I don't intend to sell anything right now, except what I did earlier, which is to sell CVS when it started trending down. So I'm hanging in there, and I wish you a good weekend, and we'll talk to you next weekend.